All right, good morning. I've been very intrigued by Ivanmike1968's last couple of videos about Call of Cthulhu. I'm no longer in a Facebook group with these guys and don't communicate with them regularly. That would be Anthony and Ivan and Eloy and Jose, but I still consider them friends, and of course, I still consider them colleagues. This is a VR to his last one, speaking the dice, right? Speaking the results of the dice. So it sounds to me like they're in a place that, in a way, I was at, 5 years ago. How do we do this thing with mechanics, where the mechanics matter, but how do we do this thing where it doesn't intrude upon my immersion, or it doesn't intrude upon my ability to just stay in character and express that mechanic in a way, non-mechanical voice, right? I don't think, again, I'm not privy to the conversation they're having, but I am privy to this because it's a public video that Ivan has shared on YouTube. And so this is a VR to that, for what it's worth to the guys. But so for me, the example he gives, and again, I've not played Call of Cthulhu, but I have played games like Delta Green that have a sanity-like device. And I don't know how the mechanic in, say, Call of Cthulhu, the fail of the sanity check must be shared literally with the GM, so the GM can say, oh, that level of failure is mechanically relevant to something he's tracking. The GM is tracking, for instance. Or if it's just pass fail. So if it's just pass fail, you don't have to speak the number at all, of course, and you don't have to just say failed, quietly, or hey, I failed, or a pat on the head, some code pat. No, express you failed by saying, by in character saying something like God, or whatever your character is. If your character happens to be God fearing, you might say, God, save me from these satanic, whatever it is, something that would convey to the party, to the group and to the GM, that you failed your sanity check. That's the easy way to stay in character, see the result. But I think also what Ivan is saying, when we see the dice roll informs us, and we can't help but process that information as it is a form of translation that occurs from literal into how does this manifest itself mechanically, and then into my character's awareness. If I'm in a role as a character and I'm told of something grotesque and gruesome, and I'm already affected as a person listening to, say, Anthony describe this whoa, I'm already whoa. Now, mechanically, is it actually affecting my character? It may already be affecting me as my character, and very often I'm affected long before in gaming then there's ever an effect upon my character actually mechanically. Dale in one of our sessions of Simba Room, his description for 2 hours of the place we were in and navigating, etc., was unsettling as hell to me. There was no mechanical effect upon tarot, never was, never will be, because that game does not feature one, but I was affected. And that's what mattered to me as a role player. I was affected, that I wanted out of that place. I was looking for an exit. I was on the run. I was leading the guys to get the hell out of this place. It didn't have to happen mechanically for my character to be motivated to get the hell out of this situation. But it is ultimately, for the sake of the game, not relevant to the game, right? The game itself is going to come down to a combat or magic roll, or right. There's no other reason to compel me as a character to feel that way or act that way or care about getting out of this situation. And that is where the difference lay in the reality of game design, game conceits, and mechanics. So if there's a mechanic there, it does matter that I may not ever feel it, but my character does, and that's going to affect the ability of my character to cope with all other upcoming challenges or all upcoming information, etc., right? Like roll for initiative. You've entered a room, goblins have surprised you. Roll for initiative as or whatever, and so that becomes okay. We're all going into combat mode. We're all going into the actual mechanical combat mode. So how I feel about it is really irrelevant. The game demands that we're going to roll dice because we're in combat with goblins. How my character feels about this I have to resolve this to express it, or I'm going to die and won't get the chance to express it, etc. We're waging war against goblins, right? Or we're going to attempt to if I feel a particular way, I might try to parlay with the goblins and avoid combat or whatever, right? So that's how we express our character. So obviously the mechanics themselves certainly have to be processed, translated, and then what does this mean to me in expression? So if I failed to roll and say Call of Cthulhu Sanity, my goal would it would not be a signal, a silent signal or whatever. It would ultimately be, and not to say, oh, dude, I failed, which we do all the time. I mean, that's just, we've become, I hate to say it, we've become comfortable and in a way, we've become comfortable and very much casual players, right? I think a lot of us have. And there's nothing wrong with that. Gaming is meant to be a social thing where you invite people to the table, all different wants and desires. And the goal is to enjoy socially this thing. And everybody should pull away from that something that's important to them, or they wouldn't show up every week, right? But I would say there's informal play, there's casual play, and most of the time we end up at a live table with pretty casual or informal play. So for me, it would be to express that I failed the insanity check by verbalizing as a character something that would cue Anthony that my character disbelieves it, or my character is referencing something that would be that would signal my character is not rationally understanding the situation or is not comfortable in this situation. But again, even Ivan talks about there may be degrees of failure that then would change the value of that 88 roll versus a 60 chance, right? It's an epic fail. It's almost 30-point failure, right? So if it's just pass fail, then we just express it and we make notes that our character suffered some more sanity damage, right, or something, right? So pretty cool. But so for me, I've always talked about simple or mastered. I either want to master the mechanics, or I want them so simple and unobtrusive that I can role play, that I can stay immersed in character, generally from a first person point of view, and we can navigate successfully all the game intent and all the game conceit and mechanics. The question is, why would, and I guess the question for me in the first video I saw was that Anthony may eventually hide his sanity rolls and just change the narrative flavor for those, so they would know they're nuts, right? Now, the information they're getting from the GM is aware he failed a sanity roll, so the GM tweaks his information, right? Which would ultimately mislead the player, which would ultimately be not trusting your own senses. That's genius. That is next tier genius. I have one problem with that. That's not the conceits of Call of Cthulhu. You have a sanity attribute on your character sheet, and you have the right to roll your sanity check, and you have the next necessity to understand that you failed the sanity check or passed the sanity check. It changes the conceits of the game design of Call of Cthulhu that you are supposed to be aware of your character and of your sanity and of your rolls. And so by doing that, it'd be a remarkable device that Anthony would then flavor their narrative toward Ivan, in which he might not be able to trust the information he's getting from Anthony, which would inherently expose your own lunacy, right? As a character, which is a brilliant way of exposing the character, the player, the character, to as I've talked about before in another video, the unreliable narrator becomes yourself. Your own psyche becomes an unreliable narrator. You can't trust your own psyche, but it's not because you're inventing it and it's vain. It's because the GM is giving you unreliable information because you have failed your sanity check, and everything you start doing from there on would express this to some degree, right? For instance, I'm in a deluded state. I think I'm seeing my wife as a monster, and I'm insane, delusion, and I honestly don't recognize it as my wife. And I grab the monster by the throat, and I'm choking out the monster, and then suddenly I come out of that, and I realize, oh my God, I'm choking my wife. And you pull your hands away, and you realize, oh my God, I'm hallucinating, I'm losing my mind. That's unreliable information. Very clever, and I think it would be very good for Ivan and the guys there in that Call of Cthulhu to try that. However, it does change the actual mechanical effect and the conceits and the design of what Call of Cthulhu is saying the players are privy to, and that the players it's part of the whole game experience, right? Which obviously they're having anyway. So once they have the normal experience, then you again tweak the rules, right? Change the delivery of, which is part of the rules, is how you deliver the game, and have it see how that affects the quality of the immersion or the quality of the game, right? I think that could become a challenge, a real challenge for the GM or for Anthony, because if let's say you have 4 people witnessing a scene and all of them fail their sanity checks, or 1 or 2 guys pass it and 2 guys fail it, you're giving multiple descriptions to 4 different people, become daunting, as you got to constantly kind of keep up that response that I've got to give them false information, or I've got to give them information that is technically not accurate. That could be very challenging for the GM, so to speak. So anyway, I think it's fascinating to see some of my old buddies and my old friends that are kind of toying with these ideas that Dell and I 3 or 4 years ago, 5 years ago, began to put into process to actually design our own simple game. And it's something about when I came to the table as a player, it's what I wanted to do, whether we were playing a game that supported it or not. It's what I wanted to do in Lamentations. I was in character first. I didn't care about the mechanics. I didn't care about whether it was foolhardy to throw my shield into the mud, or to throw my holy symbol into the mud, because it would have been a negative after it would have been a negative effect upon the survival ability of my cleric in Lamentation of the Flame Princess. But I didn't care about the mechanics advantage of having my holy symbol. I didn't care about the mechanics, the math formula that was going to keep my cleric alive. I was more concerned about perceiving the world that was put in front of me by Ivan from my character's perspective, and what he was as a person and as an individual was more valid to me than what he was as attributes in a math score where we're looking at probabilities. There's a brilliant video out there recently. It's called The Documentary of the Making of Demon's Souls, a video game. And it tells the story of the 31-year-old Japanese man who was handed the reins to make Demon's Souls. Well, Demon's Souls is probably my second favorite game of all time. It did things no other games had ever done, and it spawned an entire genre of video games called Souls-like games. So there was Dark Souls, Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 3, Elden Ring, Bloodborne, and then many Souls-like copycats. But if you watch that video and they discuss the director's mindset when he devised the game, he was the director and he was the art, he was the guy that said, this is what we're going to make. And people haven't been through this before, and here's why we're going to do it this way. The game design intent was to create an effect upon the player. It was to give the player something they'd never had before, but at the same time, give the player a sense of creating of achievement despite the difficulty, right? Okay. But what's important about that is recognizing he understood the psychology of how these things were going to affect the player. And he understood the psychology that that they will ultimately, despite the failure, the game mechanics supported the failure. The game mechanics supported them trying again and again and again until they finally succeeded, in which they would feel the euphoria of success in a video game that they could not have had if the game design had not put them in this situation over and over and over, where they would learn from their mistakes. So good game designers recognize the actual mechanics themselves should impart a particular thing upon the psyche of the player, and then the psyche of the player hopefully will benefit from the mechanics, and there's this beautiful loop to get to a place, right? Well, I don't know if role-playing, tabletop role-playing, from its origins, the birth of tabletop role-playing, anyone ever really looked at the psychology of game mechanics upon what you're trying to achieve as a player, right? Is it just expressing yourself as fantasy? What is it called? Hero. I want to be the badass waylaying and destroying all the goblins so I can become king, and it's what do you call it? Fantasy, super fantasy hero expression or whatever. You get to be that thing you're not in real life, as your boss has taken 5 hours away from you, and you needed those hours, and now you got to look for a second job. And we spend our lives victims of the world around us, and so we want to play a game in which we're executing our dominance upon some fictional world, right? Some kind of resolution there for people. But so I think mechanically, it can there I would like to think most mechanics are obviously thought about, not just to be new and different and exciting, and or to be counter to what was missing from the game that they enjoyed. So let's say people grew up playing D&D and they were always dissatisfied with the experience, and that's immediately attributed to the rules being a failure for them, or the game mechanics creating a loop that was dissatisfying. So they begin to look at creating a game, or they begin to look at a way of making a game not Dungeons and Dragons. And then we end up with these mechanics that create this environment. Meanwhile, there's another level there of the player wanting to maybe experiencing, again, I think there's been conversation about this for 30 years, you know, the simulationist, the narrativist, whatever, right? The different types of player want in their experience. But and then so I do think I do think all dice are narrative, period, right? Whether we narrate and then roll the dice to find out the result, or whether we roll the dice then narrate the result, but the dice always, right? But the gist of what I was getting to with the Demon Souls, he made some remarks. The director of Demon Souls made some remarks in talking about the making of Demon Souls, and one of those remarks was, "I didn't want the game always reduced to probabilities. I wanted it about problem solving and player involvement and players figuring it out, not just reduced to probabilities, not just reduced to math. I got a better sword, therefore I will kill this next monster. I got better armor, therefore I can survive the next wave of monsters." So it was always a math score. He wanted them, even if nothing changed for their character, they could figure out a way to defeat the monster, even if they hadn't got a better sword or better armor or better shield, etc. They could learn how to defeat the creature, because it's a mechanical game, you're button mashing. But the point was, it wasn't reduced to just probabilities. And when we reduce our gaming to just math, to just the probability of hitting, it becomes a static result that creates, in a way, a mechanical game. I can be in character, but if everything is reduced to probabilities, then it is always going to be seen, for the lack of a better word, as a pass or fail, right? I did the thing, or I did not do the thing. I did the thing really great, or I did the thing really poor. Okay, those are all it's all minutia of reading the mechanical results of the probability of the probabilities, and reading the mechanical results of said chances, right? And then I find myself either acting that out or taking on the damage, or whatever it is we do, right? But I think to speak to it, I would respond, even though I'm rolling my own sanity check and I see 88 pop up out of a 60% chance. I know I failed. I don't know the rules beyond that, whether there's some other mechanic going on that the GM's tracking, but I know this. I don't have to say, dude, 88, dude, I felt bad. I can, in character, express that I've lost my mind in some other way that would cue Anthony that I have lost my mind. Seeing an 88 on a 60, we can't help, right? It's who we are as we grew up gaming. You roll a 20, even if there's no such thing as critical hits in D&D, the minute we see a 20, we immediately go, dude, I didn't just hit him. I hit that son bitch, right? When I roll a 1, right? Even if there's no fumbles in the game, we all go, oh, dude, it just cues that we didn't just pass or fail. We failed badly, we passed badly. And there's no rules in D&D for that until they invented critical hits and critical failures. And then it made the 20 and the 1 relative. But prior to that, you just know on a scale of math numbers, when you're close to the number, you're close to success, or you were close to, I almost got it, or ooh, I just barely got it. That's the nature of probability. That's the nature of math and dice and seeing a thing. So how we represent that in character, right? I think in something like D&D, it's a hit or miss, right? Well, I did not affect the goblin on this turn with my sword and my shield in melee. I can only narrate that so many ways, which is why I think it's natural in D&D, traditional D&D, the GM narrates everything except what the players narrate. The players declare their actions and narrate their actions. The GM would generally narrate all results. And the GM could take into account how close that miss was or how bad that miss was and just narrate, right, how they were swarmed then, they fell under the, there's 4 more goblins pile around him and on them. And they succumb to the goblins, and right, in a final failure. And the players then aren't trying to perceive everything about the world. They're just concerned about executing their strategy and then rolling their dice. And I think most games this still happens, even if it's Call of Cthulhu and we're still rolling sanity checks. Ironically, it still happens. And I don't know if that makes the games less enjoyable, and I don't think it makes them less immersive. If you've mastered the game, I think even mechanical games, we can stay in character and stay immersed when we are fluent in the language of the game and the language of the mechanics. We know instantly what those mean. We had a great talk about narrative dice system with Brian and everybody the other day in our talk, and we were talking about narrative dice. You have to actually decipher the dice and then try to narrate something that makes sense of the dice pool. So that requires you to actually translate the dice. If you're actually working out what this looks like, what this means, and it demands it of you. And I think that's what makes the narrative dice system unique, and it makes it special. It's not just, okay, hit, miss. Now, how I narrate my hit and how I narrate my miss is entirely trappings. It's just decoration, right? But if I say it in certain games, like our game, if I say it, it is so. If I say I kicked the peasant into the spear on a critical success combat roll, killing the peasant instantly, it is the truth, right? It was a critical kill upon the peasant, but I didn't damage the enemy, but I kicked the peasant onto his, right? And that represents how dangerous this combat is. And this, so what I say in our game is true, or is real generally. Even if I fail something, it is real. What I say is real. Yes, and yes, but, right? It's true. So word is bond in Dark Age of Man. If you speak it, it is real. Your success or failure may affect what else is real, right? So I'm not certain something like Call of Cthulhu, if that's relevant to a sanity check, right? Again, there's more mechanics that impact sanity, right? I think your sanity also reduces by so much, kind of like taking hit point damage. So I think, you have a 60 sanity, but I think if you fail that, right, doesn't your sanity go down some? So then you're also slowly getting more and more, less and less capable of handling the outside world. And eventually you are insane and cannot handle the outside world in any rational, logical, meaningful way. And therefore, instead of running out of hit points and dying in D&D, you eventually run out of sanity and become consumed, right, by the your consciousness, your unconsciousness consumes you, your subconscious consumes you, so to speak. Anyway, it's amazing. So great videos, and again, this is VR, not asked for, of course, not requested, but it is public, so I'm going to respond to it. I'm not even certain the guys watch our videos or anything anymore, but great stuff. And I do hope to see Anthony's VR response to Ivan's remarks. All right, everybody out there, have a great week.